Thank you so much for being here for another episode of, or another webinar of the Salt Basins TIG. Today we have a really great guest. Her name is Dr. Naiara Fernandez, and she is currently a research associate at the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas, Austin. Before she completed her PhD, she worked several years in the Spanish Research Council as a research assistant for industry-sponsored projects in the Zagros Mountains and La Popa Basin, where she was first introduced to salt tectonics. She obtained her PhD in 2014 from the University of Mans, sorry if I say that wrong, I know I did, studying the dynamics of salt tectonic processes with numerical models. Since 2015, Naiara has been a part of the Applied Geodynamics Laboratory, AGL, where her research aims at understanding the processes governing the evolution of geologic structures in salt basins. So thank you so much, Naiara, for being here. It's great to see you, and you can go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thank you, Rochelle, for the introduction and all the team for the invitation. So it is really a honor for me to be here because this seminar series has been really great, and I want to, make that emphasis on that this has been really great. So with that, I will just get this talk started. So here is a long title: Minibasin mobility and obstruction on salt-detached slopes, and it's I'm going to talk about the implications of this process for canopy dynamics and sediment routing. And you can see that this has been a teamwork. So you can see listed here the co-authors. So basically, this is I put together several part of our recent work in the AGL group consortium. But of course, if there is something wrong, so you can blame me completely. So first of all, I would also want to acknowledge our sponsors. You can see the current list of the sponsors in the AGL website. And a special thanks go to CGG and Western GECO for having provided access to the 3D seismic data that will be shown here. Basically, the data has some, it's sensible. So I'm going to show maps, but they are not located, they are rotated, and I cannot show any seismic line location. I will try to make my best to actually help you, relate what you see map view to the sections, but there is no location explicitly shown. So let's start with a very basic definition of or a sketch of a salt-detached slope with a smooth base of salt. You can see here is the subside geometry has this angle or tilting, and it's really smooth. And we have this red layer, which represents the salt. And as you would expect, given due to gravity, the salt would start moving downslope. And with it, it carries the sedimentary cover on top. And this will result in partitioning of the formation along the slope that probably most of you are familiar with. Basically, we would have extension in the active part of the slope, and we would have some shortening in the toe of the slope. And in the middle, we are left with the transitional translational domain. And if we want to understand a little bit better what happens here, if instead of a continuous sedimentary cover, we put some minibasins there, we can check on very simple numerical models. Those have been run with a MATLAB-based numerical model. You can learn more about the details here. But basically, what I did here was put this slope and then add a layer of salt on top and let gravity do the work. And I tweaked the boundary conditions at both sides of the slope. So basically, this means that the thickness of the salt is kept constant. This is artificial, but I wanted to kind of represent what is happening in the translational domain. So as I said, when you let gravity do the work, the salt will just flow down slope. So if now we add a mini basin here in the close to the upper part of the slope, and we let the process run, this mini basin is happily translating on a slope. And it does so because there is no obstacle to it. So basically, mini-basin is translating with the salt downslope. However, we can ask the question, what happens if actually instead of having this smooth base of salt, we have a base of salt which is very irregular, like represented in this sketch. So this is a sketch showing the base of salt with this step here, and we have mini basins that are translating towards the right of the sketch. And you can imagine that those mini basins, if they are accommodating sediments, they will also become thicker. And at some point, what can happen is that this mini basin, it becomes so thick that actually can get in contact with the base of salt. And it can be buttressed and welded. And this is what we are calling a mini basin that is obstructed. Basically, this mini basin won't be able to keep translating downslope. And this will result in this characteristic strain patterns. So basically, because this mini basin cannot move further, but the ones around it can still move with the salt, in the downslope, we have an extension between the two mini basins, whereas in the upslope, we have shortening between the two mini basins. So what I'm going to do in this talk, basically, is extend a little bit on the implications of this process. Because if you want to learn all about this process, you can check Oli's talk, Oliver Duffy's talk. I think it was in October in this seminar series. So he expands on the mini-basin obstruction process. And here we are going to explore some of the implications. First one is, what could be the influence of mini-basin obstruction at a more regional scale, at a mini-basin domain scale, and canopy dynamics? Then we want to explore how does mini-basin obstruction affect sediment transport systems, and if it does so. And then finally, I want to introduce a concept or a new idea related to the question whether we can reproduce patterns, deformation patterns, similar to the ones associated with obstruction without mini-basin welding. So let's start with the first part. This work has been recently published in Basin Research, so you can revisit this if you're interested in more details. But basically, this is work dealing with the influence of mini-basin obstruction at mini-basin domain scale and canopy dynamics. And if we want to study the mini-basin obstruction process, what's a better place than the northern Gulf of Mexico, where the idea has been developed by Oli and some previous workers. So here you can see a geographic map of the Gulf of Mexico and a detail of the northern part with the bathymetry shown here in these blue to greenish colors. And this is a seismic section. Basically goes in this orientation, so it would be along a strike of the slope, and you can see these very irregular geometries. So in red we have the salt. Then these greenish are some sub-canopy mini basins, and those yellow ones are supra-canopy mini basins. And because I know that there may be people that are not very familiar with the Gulf of Mexico geometries associated with the salt canopy, here is a very brief cartoon of how this canopy actually formed. So what is inferred as evolution is in this cross section, you see the orientation here. Basin words would point to the deeper areas of the basin. You have a salt layer, and you have some mini basins initially subsiding into this salt layer. And what happens is that as the salt is extruded in between the diapirs, through the diapirs between the basins, it can actually encapsulate those early mini basins, and it can amalgamate into this big canopy. And then in a later stage, we have another phase of sedimentation. And this is what is forming our supra-canopy mini basins. And all the time I'm talking here about mini basins, in this presentation, I will refer to these supra-canopy mini basins. So this could be the present day canopy edge that is basically giving us this topographic relief in the bathymetry. And another important point from this slide, which seems very busy, but the key points are how this canopy formed also to explain what are feeders. So feeders were those initial diapirs that then have been feeding the salt from the deeper level here to the canopy. And those present-day data, they look like these structures, right? They are these deep structures filled with salt, or may not filled with salt, as we will see later. But this is, I guess, the key message from this slide. So now that we have a cross-section in the Gulf of Mexico, we can compare what are the key elements for obstruction here and make the analogy from the cartoon of the process. So basically, as we said, this depends on having an irregular base of salt. And the base of salt in the sketch here corresponds to this yellow surface here that goes or that depicts the feeders in the data. And then this is what we have mapped in our study area. And here, the dark blue colors are then those feeders. And then another key element is how thick our minibasins are, or the configuration of our minibasins. And this is represented by this yellow line here. And we have also mapped that in our data. And in this surface, those lows, those bluish colors represent our minibasins. As I said, those are the supra-canopy minibasins. So if we now pay more attention of the distribution of all those features in our study area, what we see is that in the base of salt, we have a widespread distribution of feeders, but yet we have some areas that are devoid of this kind of feeders. So this area, for example, has actually a relatively smooth base of salt. Whereas this other area, it not only contains abundant feeders, but also in between the feeders, we have a very rugose base of salt. You can see this geometry is very tortuous. We have also some lows here and some protuberances here. So it's really, really irregular. Now, in the case of the top salt, as we said, this represents the geometry of the mini basins. We can see that in this area, we have a relatively shallow or thin mini basins dominating the area. Whereas here, in this other area, we have some instances of very deep, thick mini basins. If you check the color bar, those can be mini basins that are up to 15 kilometers thick. So those are really huge. So basically, based on those very basic descriptions, we can split the domain into two sections. So we'll call them the northeast domain and the southwest domain. And basically, as I said, the northeast is an area that has a relatively low base of salt relief and shallow supra-canopy mini basins. Whereas the southwest has a very high base of salt relief, and it has many more instances of deep supra-canopy mini basins. And now we are going to check out two type sections for the southwest and for the northeast. And the southwest, as I said, is this area with very irregular base of salt topography. And this is clearly seen in these two cross sections. So the orientation of the cross sections now is along the slope. So in this presentation, the downslope is always towards the right. And one of the things clear is that the base of salt is very regular. We have many feeders that are giving us this irregularity, and many of those feeders contain mini basins inside. And those are what we will call bucket mini basins. So we have those ones that are extremely thick, and they are actually reaching to the deep salt level. Whereas now, if we check two tight sections for the northeast domain, this one that is has more gentle, relatively gentle base of salt relief, you can see two different type sections. So this one is the one that goes across this very smooth base of salt area. And you can see here it has no feeders. Whereas in that area, you have seen in map view, there are some feeders. There are some that are relatively wide, but some others are really narrow. So basically, there are areas in the northeast that have high relief, some feeders, but not all the feeders here are filled with mini basins as opposed to the previous sections. So if we put this in map view, again, this is the base of the salt where we can see the feeders. Those are our feeders, and now I have color coded them according to whether they have a mini basin inside. This is the red and the yellow. And the green are the feeders that do not have a minibasin inside. And you can see those are quite narrow ones here. The red ones could represent those huge bucket minibasins that we just saw in the section. So those are the minibasins that reach to the deep salt level. And then this, if we compare with what was published in, by Oli related to the obstruction of minibasins and areas of potential buttressing, we can see that there is a coincidence, of course, with the areas filled with bucket minibasins, red dots, to the areas that were mapped as severely obstructed. And again, we can actually make a comparison between the two areas in the map. This area has less feeders, and the areas are mapped as less severely obstructed. So we have more yellow and green colors than red color, but we have some area here. Instead, in the southwest, we have several feeders that are completely filled, and there are many other areas marked as highly obstructed, so these orange areas. So basically, looking at the present day morphology, we thought, okay, so if we actually could think of this distribution of elements in terms of how they facilitate the mobility of the cover, this greenish area, with respect to the sub-canopy geometry, we could definitely say that the eastern part of the domain would allow for some type of detachment, because either we have a smooth base of salt, or if we do have an irregular base of salt, the minibasins are relatively thin on top. So we could probably still be able to draw in some areas some detachment level this way. Whereas if we check now to this other southwest domain, the one that we call obstructed, this is how it looks like. Definitely, if you try to pull this cover away from this other one, it could be very difficult to get these things slide past each other, because this is almost like a, well, this is pinned to the one to the other. So we were thinking, okay, this domain in the northeast has higher potential for mobility than obstructed, but this is applying to the present day geometry. So the question is, what does this mean in terms of past translation that has happened in the area? And that's a tricky question because assessing or constraining a translation in the translational domain of a slope is quite challenging, because we sometimes lack cutoffs of faults or other structures. Much of extension can be accommodated by extending diapirs, so maybe we don't have a record of that. And there had been in the past 2 lines of evidence used to actually constrain on the magnitude of the translation. And those are transported block of minibasins. And this is applicable to an area with a salt canopy as the Gulf of Mexico. And basically, the idea is that if you have a roof on top of a former diapier and then extrude it onto a salt sheet, or a minibasin on top of that diapier, and pieces of that roof or that minibasin completely are transported with the salt sheet and in the canopy, if we could identify where this minibasin is coming from, then we could actually constrain the transport magnitude. Another line of evidence that has been recently applied to many salt basins is the ramps incline basin concept, in which basically if we would have a ramp in the base of salt and we have a translating cover on top of the salt, as this cover goes through that ramp, there would be a lowering in the topography, and this can be filled with sediments. And if you keep pulling, you would deposit new sediments on top, and you would form this kind of on-lap surface. And the idea is that if you can identify some of the on-lap surfaces, you know at some point that on-lap surface was related to the position with respect to the ramp below. So you can use that as a proxy for the translation distance. And luckily for us, we actually have a nice example of a structure that we interpret as a ramp incline in our study area. So basically, you can see it interpreted here. What we see is this is our sub-canopy geometry, and this is showing this kind of well, flattish geometry transitioning into a ramp. And one of the things is that we don't really know where the transition to the flat geometry would be active. But we do see what seemed to be a geometry similar to the ramp incline process. Basically, we have onlapping surfaces on top of this pre-ramp wedge, which is almost a constant thickness. And this is located in our northeastern domain. And based on this interpretation, we suggest that there has been at least 42 kilometers of downslope transport as indicated by this structure. And it indicates also continuous transport from before the Pliocene to present day. So I guess the oldest age marker is here. So it's Pliocene. We don't know the age of the deeper sequence here. And then another example that we have used to constrain the transport is in our study area, is given by this duplicated section. So basically here, we know that this, which could be interpreted as a supra-canopy minibasin, is contains some Miocene sequence. We have some markers giving us the top Miocene. We also know that this overlying top Miocene sequence, because we have the age here. So basically, this is a duplicated sequence. It could have not formed here. And this is equivalent to what I showed in the cartoon. So basically, we are just interpreting this as a rafted minibasin, and we must, we could know the transport magnitude if we could identify where this rafted minibasin is coming from. And a potential source area is this feeder here, which is big enough to accommodate the size of this minibasin. And it's located 40 kilometers up deep. However, it's currently occupied by a bucket minibasin. But this bucket minibasin, according to the age constraints that we have, we think that probably subsided into the feeder and was obstructed between the markers of this age. So basically, if I put this together into a very simple evolutionary sketch, this is how we envision things happened. So we had this study area. We have the southwest here, the northeast here. In both cases, we have feeders that are more abundant in this area and bigger. So this is how it's shown in the picture. This is the southwest area here. And as these minibasins translated and keep becoming thicker, what happened is that in the southwest area, those minibasins sank into the feeders and formed these bucket minibasins. Whereas the section to the east, this area here, could continue translating. So this would have resulted in some larger front advance that we have identified to be a few kilometers. So basically, we said both areas were translating, but at some point, the western area was obstructed, whereas the eastern area continued sliding. And this is the message. So to wrap up this first part, basically, we could identify regional domains that can be characterized according to their obstructing elements. And based on present-day morphology, we can classify them as mobile or obstructed, as shown in this sketch. And then the obstructed domain, this one here, likely obstructed in the Pleistocene, while the mobile domain remained mobile and kept advancing. This is how it's shown in this sketch here, and we have identified some differential canopy advance for that stage of the time. So that's part one, and then I will kind of switch a little bit gears, still talking about minibasin obstruction and how it affects sediment transport systems. And again, this is based on the idea that if we have an obstructed minibasin that can have shortening up deep, like shown here, an extension down deep, we would expect those to have a topographic expression on the seafloor and may act as barriers or conduits to sediments. And this is what we are exploring for a cluster of minibasins located in the lower slope in the Gulf of Mexico. So now this map represents the top salt, and so this could be these bluish colors could be the shape of our minibasins on top of the salt, and this could be the canopy edge. So now, as I cannot show the location of the section, but I will try to indicate clearly here that this is going from minibasin 2 to minibasin 3. So it's going from this minibasin here to this minibasin here, and this is cross-section that clearly shows that those minibasins are thick enough that they are actually welded to the base of the salt. So they are welded. I mark them as welded here. Whereas if now we check what is happening between minibasin 4 and minibasin 5, you can see those minibasins still contain some salt below. So they can potentially keep subsiding and potentially keep translating downslope. So basically, in those clusters, in those minibasins, we have the potential for this minibasin obstruction to occur. So did it occur and how it affected the sediments in the sediment systems in the area? So in order to assess the positional systems in the area, what we did for this particular work was map several horizons, and today I'm going to talk about the shallowest 3 here that go from the deepest yellow one to the green light and to the pink, and we extracted the RMS amplitude map for each of those horizons, and we interpreted our sediment transport systems based on those amplitude maps, and this is what we are going to see next. So basically, in this yellow horizon, this is how the extraction looks like. I will not explain much detail about this because we will come a little bit later. I just wanted to show the maps in which we based our interpretation for this work. So basically, we have put pieces not only based on the RMS extraction, but also on some cross section. So we believe that there is a channel system that travels this way, and then it spills out into the continental rise this way. So this yellowish is our channel system. For our next stage, this green horizon, we have a similar morphology for this part of the study area. So we have it identified a channel system this way. But now what we can see is that it seems to be a spilling in a different area. And we will come back to that later. And then finally, this pink horizon shows a complete different picture. Really, we don't have a system anymore. We have a time where the area is actually dominated by mass transport complexes. So this is just a small part of our maps. But basically, we can identify one such mass transport system by following these linear features here that represent the scours or the marks that this mass transport leaves when it travels through the area. And this is how we interpret it. So now we have 3 different, pictures or snapshots in time of the positional system in the area. Now we are going to investigate what is the cause for those swifts. And for that, as I said, I will go in a little bit more detail to see what the differences are between each of those stages. So here we can see the time of the yellow horizon. As I said, we have a channel system. It's entering the study area in minibasin 1. It goes through minibasin 2. This is an erosional feature shown in green. It goes through minibasin 5, almost following the slope directly until it spills out into the continental rise. Then next time, as I said, we still identify a similar channel system. It actually is entering from the same area into the study area. It still shows some erosional feature here, but now when it reaches minibasin 5, instead of going straight down to the continental rise, what it does, it takes a turn to the left, and it spills in this other area. So basically, there is several kilometers of difference in the point of a spill for this channel, and the change happens in minibasin 5. So why? Well, let's go back to our idea of obstruction and try to understand better what is happening in this area. So, as I said, minibasins 4 and 5 are here not marked as welded, so they still have some salt below. But this was a section that was going through the main body of the minibasin, so this white area in map view. So if actually we check a section that goes through this other area here, the picture looks quite different. So basically, minibasin 5 in this area is welded at the base, as you can see here. And we think this is because in that particular area, the subsalt sequence is climbing up. So you can see instead of having this topographic load, this area is climbing up. So I put that in the map as welded as well. And then interestingly, minibasin 4 and 5 in this particular area are separated by this overthrust, or this thrust structure that I marked as shown here in the section. So what we think happened, this is how we interpreted this, or the genesis of this thrust, is that we had minibasins 4 and 5, those two, traveling along the slope, and as minibasin 5 was becoming thicker and it approached this area of higher subsalt sequence, it became welded. And we know that sometimes welded minibasin means obstruction. So this minibasin was prevented from moving farther, whereas minibasin 4, which was up deep, could continue moving. And this resulted in both of them, or minibasin converging towards minibasin 5, and finally forming a thrust or overthrusting it. And interestingly, the onset of this overthrusting recorded by the stratal geometries, we interpreted it happened between the yellow and green horizons, which is when we have this shift in the submarine channel system spill point. And this is shown in more detail in minibasin 5. So this could represent the yellow horizon. This is our channel system that we see is traversing across minibasin 5. Then if we check a little bit higher in the sequence, we have a time where we don't see much any characteristic or coarse deposition as interpreted in the amplitude map. Whereas a little bit higher in the sequence, what we see is some holding here, but also we see some kind of chaotic blocks close to this area. So we think this is basically a mass slide, and we relate that this represents the onset of the thrusting. And then later in the green horizon time, which is when we had the other area interpretation, what we see is this is a channel system that is entering this way, but now actually we can continue it this way, and we see it spilling in other cross section outside of the minibasin 5. So what we think is that this overthrust may have caused a lower topography, and then the next time the channel system was entering minibasin, it actually preferred to go through the lower topography and exit minibasin to the north. So a recap of what the events that are in place here is, so we have this initial stage. We know those, so we know this part of the minibasin 5 is welded, and we know this minibasin could still move towards the downside of the slope, which means here it could overthrust minibasin 5. We think that this could have lowered the topography, which means next time channel system entered or entered from the same area, instead of following the previous path, what it did was use this other side. So it was kind of captured by this overthrust loading. Now let's continue the story. So we have this this geometry of our depositional system. We have left a submarine channel system that exits this way. And then next regionally mapped horizon, what we see is this other picture. So we have this mass transport system, and we see this mass transport system, instead of also following a downslope path, what it does is take this turn to the right. So why? So, and now we are going to look at what happens in this particular area to try to explain this deflection of this MTC. And for that, again, a sketch of our minibasins in the area. As I said before, those two minibasin 2 and 3 are clearly welded, so they have this very constant thickness sequence on top of them. But now, if we check a section that goes from minibasin 2 to minibasin 5 along this area here, we can see that there is this this area of normal faults because this minibasin was pulling away, so this minibasin was drifting away, and we formed this extensional breakaway as predicted by the obstruction model, and probably because this was assisted by also by salt, because this minibasin, remember, this is still subsiding, so probably evacuated salt that could actually amplify this uplifting of the footwall. And I have done this faults here, but as you can see, this is a more complex fault system, right? It's a conjugate system. So this is what we believe happened. Again, we have minibasin 2 and 5 happily traveling down the slope. And as minibasin 2 was welded to the base of salt, and minibasin 5 could continue to not only travel downslope, but also keep subsiding. So we have this kind of fault system where the footwall is uplifted with respect to the hanging wall. And the idea is that this actually caused a topographic barrier. So this is the continuation of the story. Again, insisting this minibasin was drifting away. It formed this normal fault system, which acts as a barrier. And then this results that the MTC does not travel, avoids this barrier, and it takes the time to the right. So this is a summary of this part. So basically, we wanted to explore how minibasin obstruction affects sediment transport systems. And actually, I guess we think we can relate what is happening in our study area to minibasin obstruction. So basically, we know minibasin obstruction results in up-dip shortening that is accommodated in the area by an overthrust. Based on our interpretation and on available H constraints, we think that the overthrust that caused the topography happened at the same time that this channel system was captured. So we think there is a relation there. So this is how we depict it. There was this overthrust, the topography was lowered, and the channel system took a turn to the left. And then for the upper in the sequence, we have a minibasin obstruction happening that results in down-dip extension that is accommodated by normal faults, like represented in this sketch. And what we think is that in this case, this uplifted footwall is causing a topographic barrier. And the MTC, it's also reacting to that by avoiding this barrier and taking a turn to the right. And that's all for part 2. And then this is a very short last part in which we actually wanted to introduce an idea. So basically, the question was, can stream patterns that are similar to those ones associated with obstruction occur without minibasin welding? And remember, stream patterns, we are always talking about the up-dip shortening and the down-dip extension when a minibasin is obstructed. So this question came when we were working on this obstruction work and interpreting our area, because we can definitely see there are minibasins of many various thickness in our study area. Whereas this is welded, and we would expect the obstruction or shortening occurring between those two, we also thought that these two are moving, but this is much thinner. So the question was, will they have the same effect? Because, I mean, are they moving at the same rate? So they may actually be translating at different velocities. So would that have an effect? And how this could affect the strain patterns around minibasins? So I go back to these very simple models. Again, the salt sliding on top of a smooth and inclined plane. And this velocity, we know based on fluid dynamics that the velocity of this salt depends on salt thickness, viscosity, density, slope angle, etc. But basically for the same geometry, same salt thickness, same everything, if the only thing that we change is the thickness of the minibasin, we will see that they are moving at different rates. And I will start this movie. I will give this minibasin some time of advantage ahead, and then I will start this later. And you see that this thinner minibasin, it's actually, I mean, if this was a race, this definitely would be a clear winner. So it's moving faster. So they have different velocities. And we have done a bunch of models to test different things. And this is the, I guess, the synthesis image. If you want to check more movies, the preprint is available. So basically, the key points is that, as we saw, minibasin thickness is controlling the speed at which minibasins travel. Thicker minibasins are translating slower. But also the geometry of the minibasin itself is actually impacting the minibasin velocity. And for a most simple case is that the wider minibasin will be slower. And then finally, we can have, as we know, minibasins that may be denser or less dense than salt. So the denser the minibasins are, because they have a higher vertical density-driven subsidence, they will be slower in their lateral transport. So why do we care about this? So I guess what the main point is, like, this means that if we have different thicknesses of minibasins translating at different velocities, we can have this kind of effects. And this is a very simple case in which we have a thick minibasin in the middle and two thinner ones, up dip and down dip. And I guess the main point here is that because the thicker one is slower, and the thinner ones are faster, we are seeing the thinner one in the front drifting away and the thinner one in the up dip area converging. So we have this kind of shortening up dip of the thicker minibasin and extension down dip of the thinner minibasin. So this is, I guess, a more a way of showing the same process, but now we have a connecting minibasins through a roof and compared with when they are not connected. So I guess the idea is, like, when there is not a roof to connect them, we clearly see that the thinner minibasins start with a faster velocity. Whereas for the case of the ones that are connected, they start at similar velocities, and then the one that can break away, it can go faster. So basically, that's a very simple concept that we wanted to explore, because now we can reevaluate some of our ideas, because this is what we expected when minibasins get obstructed, welded with a base of salt, right? Downslope extensional breakaway, upslope shortening. However, I think this is just a, I thought if what we saw in the models is actually working, we have to be then cautious, and we have to consider the possibility that they may not be to be welded when this deformation or patterns, extreme patterns occur. However, I want to say that our previous work is actually constrained by all the I guess time constraints that we have. So I think we know when the obstruction occurred or the welding occurred, and it coincides with all those extreme patterns. But anyway, so can extreme patterns similar to the ones associated with obstruction occur without welding? Well, the short answer is yes, and here is just explaining it a little bit why. So minibasins of different thicknesses translate at different velocities. So this means they can converge and diverge to each other while being transported on top of salt. And this convergence and divergence can be accommodated by shortening and extension in a pattern similar to what we saw with obstruction of minibasins. And this is for the part 3, and just want to do the final wrap up. Basically, in this talk, I just wanted to share some concepts or implications for the minibasin obstruction model. So one is that this minibasin obstruction model can have an influence at the minibasin domain scale and canopy dynamics, as we saw in the first part. Also that minibasin obstruction, because it can result in those shortening and extension structures that may alter the topography, can definitely have an effect on sediment transport systems and reroute them, as we saw in the case of a drainage capture and deflection of an NTC. And then finally, as a final concept, we need to consider the possibility that minibasins translating at different velocities can cause extreme patterns similar to those ones expected from obstruction without the welding. And that's all. Thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
That's great, Naiara. Thank you very much for your talk. Really enjoy that. So we have a few questions from the chat.
I don't think I can see the chat now. I don't know. Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll read them out to you. That was great. So our first question is from Zoltan Unger, who first says, thanks a lot for a great talk. I'm convinced that in most of the giant salt basins, there are deeper sources for the so-called young salts with, okay, it's more of a comment. Zoltan is saying he's convinced that in most of the salt giants, there are deeper sources for the young salts with even older feeders maybe than what you've seen in your seismic data.
Yeah, I might, so I have been working in this data of the Gulf of Mexico since 2018. It's just a part of the Gulf of the northern Gulf of Mexico, right? I don't think it. I mean, I know I have seen 2D sections where the styles are completely different. This is something I'm aware of. So this is something that we know it's happening in this particular study area. Yeah, I don't think I can,
Yeah, the scale is always amazing. For someone who has never worked Gulf of Mexico, I always find the scale spectacular. Our second question is from Mark Rowan. Hi, Naiara. Nice talk. Are you suggesting that welded mini basins can no longer move laterally? Or do they just move less and more slowly? In Mark's opinion, you can see ongoing translation today, basin word, and then he has a follow-up statement, and that is without local extension to explain translation basin word of the welded mini basins.
I completely agree. So basically, this is why in the first part, in order to basically, I hope I put enough emphasis when I'm talking about this area being obstructed and locked. This is a word I was using before. It's because we have these bucket mini basins, so they are definitely inside the feeders, and I don't think there is an argument that if they are touching the down deep wall of the feeder, that they can move laterally. At least in their deeper parts, they can probably deform in the shallower part. But I know that and Oli classified in his work obstruction at different degrees of severities. So we know and are aware that mini basins that are welded or apparently welded can still move if the base of salt is allowing to do so, if it's a relatively low relief or a slope. So even I think in physical models by Tim, he says mini basins can translate quite a bit, even if they are if they have reached the base. And to be honest, in my numerical models, this is something I haven't actually investigated much, but it's very difficult to actually stop one mini basin, even if welded. So that's that's there. Maybe because my mini basins have this little surface area of contact, that can be probably one point, and this is something that can also influence how much friction they have and how much they can translate.
Fantastic. Our next question is from Maria Roma, who says, really nice presentation, thank you. Can a welded mini basin welded against a downslope dipping base of salt be translated?
Okay, the welded against a dipping base of salt. Yes, so I think, I mean, again, I think, yes, the problem with having the base of salt dipping the other way around is that I guess you would need to have not only to work against the friction of the base, but also against gravity, right? I mean, I guess, to be honest, I'm just thinking aloud here, but I guess if you would have a super huge mini basin that is welded and it's welded against something that is dipping against the salt slope, I think it might be really difficult to make it climb the slope. Maybe in a smaller mini basin that could be easier, but I do think, as I said before, I do think mini basins may not be completely stopped once welded. unless they have this huge, lateral wall or constraint against which they are buttressed. So that's, I hope it was clear. That's why I always try to talk about bucket mini basins and feeders myself.
Fantastic. Our next question is from Hussein Ali, who asks, what is the thickness relationship between the different mini basins?
I don't think I know the thickness relation between the different mini basins. I don't know if you mean about the data in our area or about the numerical models.
I'm guessing he's looking at so he follows up with the ones with the sand fairway versus the starved mini basin. So maybe.
Okay, let me check because I don't think I can give you the numbers, but I guess we can check the
ratios. Ratios should be fine. Good question. Good question.
I don't know if you can still see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
So okay, so there is sorry, here maybe. So here is I hope you are talking about these particular cases because basically these ones. Okay, there is several things to factor in here. Oops, sorry. Yeah, I will just make the screen there. And maybe I'm not understanding where your question is going towards. So basically, those mini basins that are welded here, and this is probably an example to what Maria Roma was saying, right? This mini basin is welded. I guess you could still argue. I guess you need to have a push from the upslope to make this, climb this slope. Whereas if there was no push at all, and you just let gravity do its work, actually, you could probably say, oh, maybe it's a sliding the opposite way. So, I mean, those are things to factor in. Related to the thickness, I think one important thing when we talk about this idea of obstruction and, topography being created and so on, one important thing is like, I don't want to talk about relative thickness, because one of the important things here is that we have to consider our basal topography is very irregular. So a mini basin that here is 2 kilometers minus 7, so 5 kilometers thick, it is welded here. Whereas in some other areas may not be welded. So, I mean, this is something that to bear in mind. So if we compare those ones here with the ones up deep, this one again, I don't think it's in this particular case, it's not only a matter of thickness, but how much salt is left below. Because this one it has similar thickness, right? From 2 depth to the deepest point is 7, and it's still subsiding. And this one is the one in which we can identify, this building transport system. Whereas interestingly, in the ones welded, what we see, it's actually more erosional elements. Well, I guess that was our calculation. I don't know if I answered that.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty good to me.
I mean, you can reach out to me because.
Yeah, if you have a follow-up question or you'd like to clarify, just type that in the chat. That'd be great. Oh, he says, I mean, these mini basins still considered as an accommodation space.
Exactly.
And are they receiving sand? Yeah.
Yes. So, these ones, as I said, welded, I think they may still be able to upgrade if there is such kind of a system working. And you can see, from the pink horizon here to the seafloor here, there is some, sediment, but it's very thin. Whereas for the same time step here, these are accommodating much more space for sediments. But again, I don't think this is as much a matter of how thick the mini basin itself is, which of course may help with, if it's a density-driven subsidence, it may help. But importantly, this is possible because we have some salt below left, which is allowing for this subsidence. Yeah.
Fantastic. Our next question is from Hemen Koi, who says, good talk. Unfortunately, he missed it. I missed the start of it. So Hemen, it's on YouTube in about a week's time, so you can check it out there. Is it possible that a mini basin dies out or accumulates less sediment during transportation? And have you seen this in your data?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think this is a really interesting question. And me, myself, the thing is like, one of the messages that I wanted to put in this first talk is that it's difficult to constrain, when the transport of those minibasins was happening. So based on data, I think, and that would be an interesting topic to study. But I think we know that the Ramsing plan, this was translating, and it can accumulate a lot of sediments through transport, and it's still probably moving. But yeah, definitely, I think as you are adding sediments, you are getting closer to being welded. Probably, as soon as you start, filling the base of the salt, the subsidence may be harder. You may create less accommodation space. So, but I guess even if welded, we can still not accommodate maybe, but upgrade the sediments on top. But I think this is an interesting question to explore the data further.
Fantastic. Frank Peel hops in and is asking, do we see these processes in other basins elsewhere in the world? And he also says, great presentation.
Do we see, well, you may answer that question. Well, I guess definitely long lateral transports can happen in many salt basins in the world without the need of a canopy probably. And, there are works studying, that have actually constrained the transport of minibasins in, I guess, in Santos, in the Mediterranean. About obstruction, I do think, as long as you have a base salt, irregular base salt topography and lateral transport, I think we may see obstruction. So, and again, we may also see strains resulting from this differential velocity with minibasins. So if you have those two elements, I think definitely you can, probably you will need to keep an eye for this kind of processes. This applies to many basins.
Nice one. I have my own question regarding the crustal faulting that you see at sort of these boundaries between these mini basins. Does the strike of these fault systems, do they usually follow sort of the geometry of the subsalt ramp that's kind of controlling where the welding is happening and where these structures are forming, or do they more closely follow sort of the regional I guess tilt of the margin?
Well, I want to show you this slide here, which was cut out for time. So I don't know if you can see this. So basically, the extensional breakaway that we talk about is this F2 fault. But you can see this extensional area in between all those minibasins is a kind of a complex system of normal faulting. And this is the one that I talked about. I simplify it to put it as a straight line. But definitely the geometries I think are. Oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted to show. The geometries basically are a combination of both, right? So I guess we have to think, and this is being transported to the downslope direction, but you still have faults that are oblique to that transport direction. And I mean, we can go into details of this, but basically, the work we did trying to constrain the timing of those faults, I think it was really interesting, because actually what we saw is that when this minibasin is welded, we have a starting fault in this area here. And as time evolves, this seems the extension seems to be progressing to the active side until at some point, this is the main dominant extensional segment here. But you can see you have, so if this I would say might be, roughly perpendicular to the downslope orientation. But those two are completely oblique. So you can, the problem here is trying to constrain the strike slip component of those, right? But you can imagine you may have more in those two segments. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I'm just thinking it's 3 o'clock. Are you okay? We have a few more questions in the chat. Are you happy to stick
Please,
around and answer a few more?
Bring them on.
Fantastic. So Oscar Fernandez says, thank you very much, Cassius. Ian Watson asks, says, thanks for a great talk, Naiara. In this talk, you have focused on translation in the shallowest salt detachment. Do you think there could be movement on the deeper detachments, such as the mother salt, that could complicate the story?
Yes, because it probably complicates the story. We haven't tried to reach to that. I think the person to actually that may have some insight into that is Frank Hill. He's having working a lot in the deeper section, and we know in our area we have some definitely sub-canopy structures such as shortening, and some of the feeders may be closed. So were they wider and they were closed, which means there was some kind of translation. Definitely, I cannot say more than yes. There may be a component of detachment, and we haven't looked at it me personally.
Nice one. We have one last question from Evie Ganaway Dalton. Great talk, Naiara. For the switch in the channel system to the MTC, was that also controlled in any way by the mini-basin obstruction, or was that a regional change in the depositional systems, and the obstruction just caused the switch in the spoke?
Yeah, I think we can clearly say it's the second option, because as I said, this map I'm showing is just for this small segment of. So it's our study area, but this if the regional nature of the transport system has changed completely. So I think it's definitely a change in the depositional systems overall in the slope. So yeah, and of course I'm lacking the connection to the shelf, to the slope transition and so on, but definitely in our more regional area, beyond what I showed here, it's dominated by mass transport systems.
Fantastic. I think that's everything. There are many people in the chat who are very pleased with your talk, Naiara. Many great talks, great presentations. So well done. A reminder to everybody, this will be on YouTube. I think in a week or so, and next week's or the next fortnight's talk will not happen. But with that, I'd like to thank you, Naiara, for a really, really interesting talk. Really cool.
Well, thank you. Sorry, thank you for the invitation and for all the attendees for listening and for the great questions. So thank you again.
Oh, we've got Kurt Tollestrup has snuck in one last question. If you're okay to answer it.
Yes, sure.
What was the RMS window for your amplitude extractions?
Oh, I would have to check that, because I think we tried. I want to say 50 meters, but maybe I'm completely wrong. But we tried different things. But I would need to check the parameters. But I want to say it was 50 meters.
Well, Kurt, if you want to follow up, you can email the Salt Basins group, and we can check in with Naiara once she confirms that.
Yeah, I will need to confirm that.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, that's great, Naiara. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. It was a really great talk. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you all.
Bye.
So have a lovely week, everyone.
Likewise.